Welcome and to the Village of Martin's Additions. For a bit of context and background, the Village of Martin's Additions became a municipality in 1985 when a village-wide referendum for Martin's Additions residents resulted in 92% voting in favor of incorporation. And this March, we will be celebrating our 40th anniversary as a municipality. And in our history, I believe you are the first Montgomery County executive to attend our council meeting. But now you're telling me maybe Neil Potter. But anyway, you were supposed to make history tonight. But but we have had previous county executives attend our community social functions, which of course you're always cordially invited to. But we have yet to have the presence of your office participate at our very local level of government. And so we sincerely thank you for accepting our invitation to attend tonight and to address and hear from our residents. I believe I can speak for most residents in the room and on the Zoom when I say the growing concerns about attainable housing strategies initiatives. Several of our residents who are here tonight and on the Zoom attended the 5 listening sessions hosted by Montgomery County Council President Andrew Friedson and Planning Director Jason Sartori. At our VMA Council meeting last month, Housing Planner Lisa Gavoni of Montgomery Planning presented the Planning Board's recommendations and what attainable housing strategies could look like here in the VMA. And she graciously answered resident questions and listened to our concerns. And our council also recently voted to include our municipality's signature on a letter signed by several neighboring municipalities to the state senator and state delegation requesting a technical amendment to the state code 20-509. I hope I said that correctly. Well, the amendment seeks to confirm that municipalities have the authority to regulate all residential housing types within their corporate boundaries without impeding any specific housing type. So as chair, I'm Katie Flipchick-Howard. Nice to meet you. I have attended several meetings over the course of the last 2 months with other local municipal leaders and Montgomery County Council members. And while county council members have said there's currently no attainable housing legislation before them, it would be helpful to our community to hear your thoughts and perspective about the current plan and the potential legislative process and what, as a municipality, should we consider doing next. So, Mr. Elrich, once again, thank you for your presence tonight. We are interested to hear what you're working on and about the current issues. Welcome to the Village of Martin's Additions. The floor is yours.
Great. Do you want me to sit here or stand up?
Where are you more
Wherever
comfortable?
you are comfortable. Yes.
We can pivot our.
Okay.
Where to begin? Just for a starter from my background, I started doing community organizing, particularly around zoning and development issues back in the early 80s. I was involved in the big fight in Silver Spring over the mega mall they were going to build there. I learned all about traffic, and so I was one of the few citizens who actually could analyze a traffic plan, look at a zoning plan, and tell you what was going to happen. Because a lot of citizens were too intimidated by that process, and so I learned how to do that when we were fighting the Silver Spring stuff. And so over the years, I would help other community groups around the county who wanted to know what's this going to do, what's the impact going to be like. I'm a big believer in the adequate public facilities ordinance, and that's relevant here because the council, starting when I was on the council, basically began changing what it was. The adequate public facilities ordinance was meant to ensure development did not occur, that transportation, schools, and other critical services. And that's why they call it the adequate public facilities ordinance. Starting toward the end of, I guess, my last 2 terms, once Marilyn Praisner died and the balance on the council shifted, they started renaming this stuff. And they took any reference to adequate public facilities out of it deliberately because they don't want residents to have an expectation of adequate public facilities. Because if you question the project and you said, well, you're not accommodating traffic or what's going to happen to our schools, and you referenced the adequate public facilities, people assumed you'd have the right to that, and the council wanted to disabuse you of that notion. I'm being blunt, but I served with those people, and I wasn't confused about what was going on. And this plan kind of takes this, along with Thrive, to a level we've never been at before. They don't count for adequate facilities for anything, there's no analysis of traffic, there's no analysis of the environmental impacts. We're very concerned about stormwater because we're already seeing floods because it's overwhelmed our system, which was built long before this level of rain. And to not take that into account is a real serious problem. They don't look at schools. One of the planning board members said, because they've heard my criticism, and they said, well, that's wrong. We consider the APFO. That is flat out not true because you don't know where the development's going to go. Unlike planned development, where they're going to zone these many acres and these many housing units, you need roads this wide, you got to accommodate service. You don't know where these houses are going to pop up. You have no way of meaningfully measuring it. And then the other thing that I thought was really disingenuous, and these are the things they say to citizen groups, is that, and when we do development, we get facilities. You get facilities when there's a planned development of a project. If I was redesigning a shopping center, I'm going to put housing on a shopping center. You look at the entrances and exits to the shopping center. You'd make sure you had accommodations to take stormwater off before you dump it all into the street. We require a lot of on-site storage of stormwater now rather than letting it go off. All those things are normal things. It doesn't happen in one-by-one development. You're not going to make somebody who builds a large house on a corner right in the street, put in a sewer that not only has to convey their water, but it's got to convey their water through pipes downstream that are too small to hold the volume they're throwing in there. So there is no APFO review. You've got one planning board member, I think it's Justin, who told people, I spoke from the planning board chair and said, developers, you don't need to go to citizens. I don't know why he's on the planning board. I don't know why the council doesn't remove him, because the whole point of having citizens on the planning board was to get a citizen perspective on this, not to have somebody else who's, as he said, if a developer wants to build 150 units, we should just let him build 150 units. I don't need a planning board for that. I just need a rubber stamp. I waste everybody's time having a planning board. So that's sort of the nexus of this. Thrive was the other thing. Thrive set the stage for this. This bill was supposed to come over with Thrive. And Hans and them talked about it. They were going to do these two bills together. When residents realized what Thrive was going to mean, which is basically what they did with this proposal, they decided they would separate the two. Separating the two technically didn't change the fact they were planning to go together. So they separated them. 1 year they did Thrive, and then they came back and they introduced this attainable housing. And the other disturbing thing I'll say is the county's role in Thrive. I don't have any veto because I would have had veto, I would have used it. We had to provide the financial estimates for the cost of infrastructure. We provided them, and Hans and Casey literally said, we don't believe them. That was the end of the discussion. No counter analysis, no rebuttal to the points our people raised. Just simply, we don't believe it, so we don't have to deal with it. I don't live in a world where I can just simply dismiss things that are presented and say, I don't believe them, so I'm not worried about it. And that's how we got where we are today. So you've got this proposal coming over. And a lot of the underlying information or justifications for it aren't true. It started out as affordable housing. Enough of us raised the point that there will be no affordable housing. Their own studies, they did a study in East Silver Spring, and the study said that any housing built here will be as expensive or more expensive than the existing single-family homes. So if you were trying to get housing for your kid who just graduated college and is 21 years old and has a startup job, you're not going to be buying $800, $900 million homes unless your parents are paying for it. But you're not paying for it out of your income, and it's not affordable. So when they realized they couldn't say that, they shifted. The first one was affordable housing, then it was missing middle. But it's the same problem with missing middle. The missing middle was supposed to deal with incomes between the high end and the low end. And if it didn't pass muster for affordable, you're never going to get affordable housing. You also weren't going to get middle housing. And so they came up with attainable housing. That's people, so people can attain housing. Yes, some people will be able to attain this housing. Most people in Montgomery County won't be able to attain this housing. The minority population, Black and brown population in Montgomery County makes about 53% of area median income. Their median income is 53% of white and Asian area median income. They're not ever going into these neighborhoods or these buildings. And this is pretty deliberate, much as the zoning of Bethesda for all high rises is like a new form of segregation, because the cost of high rises, you can't afford, most normal middle class people can't afford to pay $7,000 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment. That's, yeah, it's kind of out of sight. So they're basically, I think, doing things pretty deliberately to make sure they remove people. I live in Tacoma Park. They rezoned Maple Avenue, which is where we have all this affordable housing. We would just lose half the affordable housing in Tacoma Park on Maple Avenue because of the rezoning they did. They have begun talking about looking at neighborhoods closer to the downtowns, but not right in the downtowns, and bemoaning the concentration of poverty. Well, the folks who lived there moved into the older apartments when white people like me and my friends moved out after college. As new housing got built and as white incomes got higher, people were able to have more mobility. The older units were left behind, and so you see the older parts of Montgomery County now have very high minority populations. The other consequence of that is that landlords had to take care of property when rent tenants could vote with their feet. Right? Because if you didn't like your landlord, too high a rent or too bad conditions, you can move. For low-income people, you don't have a choice because there's not any affordable housing in this county to move to. So they've also allowed the housing quality to deteriorate. Park and Planning has no interest in this. And on the front page of their document for this plan, they asked themselves the question, is this about affordable housing? I don't know why they'd be dumb enough to do that, put it on the front page, but they said, no, it's about market rate housing, not about affordable housing. The biggest problem in Montgomery County is the lack of affordable housing. 50,000 households under $50,000 in income who cannot find a place to live here, who double up or live in really, unsuitable housing. That is not a problem that Park and Planning wants to address. This is all focused on high-end luxury housing, and that's not going to help any of us. Most recently, a developer in Pike and Rose, who had approval for three towers, 2,000 units, came to us and said, look, there's no market for 3 towers, which is true. He said, so I wanted to lower my buildings and do a 1,000-unit development, and the county can buy half of it. Park and Planning's fighting him, saying, we want you to build the towers. Even though the developer's saying there's no market for it, they're insisting that he build towers rather than build affordable housing. And the good thing about that is not only do I get the lower end of affordable housing, but I get what you would normally call the missing middle, because his project, because it's not high rise, would serve a much broader range of incomes than the high rises serve. The Park and Planning is not even interested in things like that. So what you're dealing with, I think, because I know some of the people on the planning board, they consider themselves new urbanists. And they hate suburbs. That's what they think. They think this is bad and evil. They'll tell you that this is how the county got segregated. So I got curious about that. So I pulled up population data from 1870 to the present. And I discovered that in 1870, the Black population of Montgomery County was 30%. By 1960, it declined to 3.3%. But think about it. They lived in these rural areas where they were able to buy land and stay rural. We had no city in Montgomery County, so there's no urban poverty in Montgomery County historically, because there was no city that got old and deteriorated. So they lived in these scattered sites around the county. They could not buy land in Montgomery County, and they couldn't rent property in Montgomery County. So if they didn't buy some of the places around the farms where they've been slaves, There weren't many places to go. So as they aged, think about this, you got kids, you can only divide your property into so many small lots before they're not productive anymore. So most Black people wind up leaving Montgomery County. If the kids got to college, they went someplace else because nobody would hire you in Montgomery County. And you couldn't rent you couldn't rent an apartment here or a house here, and you could not move it. You couldn't buy a house in Montgomery County. But the problem wasn't single family zoning, which Andrew and others, single family zoning is the thing that did it. It was the covenants on all the property. All the property in Montgomery County had covenants that excluded Blacks, usually Jews, and occasionally Catholics. So if you were any of those three, well, particularly the first two groups, you could not get into Montgomery County. And so Blacks had no future here. They couldn't work here, and they couldn't get housing here, which is why you see this percentage shrink. The fair housing laws are passed in the mid-1960s. By 1970, the population has started going up, and today the population's back to about 21% of Montgomery County's population, because as soon as they were allowed to buy houses or rent any place in Montgomery County, people came here to live just like my family did, which moved from DC in 1960. So the stories they tell about why we need to do this, just start out being patently false. Then there's the data they use. And you guys know about the data, the assumptions they make about this house. You've heard them talk about a housing crisis, shortage, whatever. Yeah. It's my favorite thing. So when I was on the council, I was on COG, and I served on the Transportation Planning Board. And so all of these forecasts for growth and development in the county went through that board. And the process was that they do these forecasts. They're called rounds. Right now we're in round 10. The last round was 9.2. A few years before that, it was 9. And all of the planning directors in the entire region, who are members of COG, work with their staff to estimate how much of the zoned property in Montgomery County will be built in 5-year intervals over 30 years. So round 9.2, which came out in 2015, had projections all the way out to 2045. And round 10.0, which is the round we're in now, has projections out to 2050, which is normal, to 2020 to 2050. It is done by an analysis of all the zoning you put in place, and then the planning staff estimates how many housing units will be built and need to be built. The driver is usually jobs, because people won't move to a place for housing if there aren't jobs there. And so what you need is you look for job growth to drive the housing growth. This is the only thing me and David Blair agreed on in the last election, was that population drives housing, not the other way around. And that was the way they did their forecasts. Employment. I said, you're right. Employment drives the housing growth. So a couple of years after they do around 9.0, they do a revision of 9.2. And then somebody looks at the numbers and they think that there's an imbalance between jobs and housing. And that for the jobs they're projecting, they need to build more housing. Then they called it a target. The normal thing for COG to do would have been to do a revision, say around 9.3, and to say we now estimating more housing growth because we're estimating more jobs in the county. That made sense. If they had done that, I would have been, okay, I get the bigger number. But it's never been called a target before. And we were assigned targets to build, in our case, 10,000 additional units above the 30,000 units that we were originally planned to build. And I had questions about it. Part of it was they assumed Montgomery County, they gave us the highest percentage of low-income housing because they assumed our wages were different. We were the only jurisdiction that already was at $15 an hour as a target. And right now we're at $17. They projected us as lower incomes, which projects a lower income population. Actually, we were going to have the highest incomes in the county. And so they missed that, which I thought was troubling. And the 10,000 didn't make sense the way they did it, because what you would normally do, since this is already based on existing zoning, and I tell you 5-year increments, none of that is tied to time, in the sense that this is not scheduled to be built in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years from now. It's their estimate that only so many units will be built in 5 years. And then in the next 5 years, so many more units. The units could be anywhere in the county, and there's no reason. So all they had to do was do a revision, say we're doing 9.3, and say we're going to pull forward 10,000 housing units from the outer years, because there will be demand, and demand will cause them to be built, which is the normal way things happen. They didn't do that. Instead they said, this is your target. And they left, and they didn't change the projections. So this got me curious about more than just that. So what else could I find in their numbers? First thing I found was when they did round 10.0, which I think came out in 22 or 23, the number for 2030 was back to 30,000 units. The 10,000 units they said were your target weren't added into the 2030 number. So the number stays at 30,000 units. So if there's a crisis and we have to build 10,000 extra units, and then 3 years later, you're telling me, actually the number is 30,000, not 40,000, I thought something was seriously wrong with that. And that led me to do, the next thing was actually to look at all their job and employment, housing, and population numbers. And what I found consistently is they are projecting a drop in 46,000 jobs in Montgomery County. Drop. 46 fewer than they're projecting. So if you're losing 46,000 jobs, you hardly have a crisis of housing units, because you're actually going to have fewer people here needing housing than what you projected. I expected to see the 10,000 added to 30. It wasn't there. I thought there would be a normal growth pattern, but instead I see a reduction in housing units, and further then they're in jobs, and then reductions in housing units in the out years. And that's why I brought this, which is kind of a condensed view of a comparison of round 9 to round 10, their projections for jobs, housing, and population. And I told Artie, who's the planning board chair, I said, you make this really easy, because I only use your numbers and I use your quotes. So when you say there's no affordable housing, I use that. And when your numbers say the population's going down, I use that. And if you add all this stuff up, it doesn't make any sense. My interpretation of what's happened is that basically you have these very extreme people on the planning board who don't like, as I said before, the suburban fabric. They decided to say, my God, there's this horrible housing crisis, and we must build more housing. And then suddenly everybody's echoing. It's almost like a Fox News echo chamber, where everybody takes the same lines and says the same thing. Andrew talks about a moratorium and how great it was we lifted the moratorium. Moratoriums were in place because we weren't building the infrastructure. The only places that went into moratorium is if you failed traffic tests or school tests. Lifting the moratorium could have been done anytime the county council decided to fund schools and transportation. That's the way you get rid of moratoriums. They just got rid of moratoriums by saying we're not going to do them anymore. And they did not correspondingly take on policies that would increase the amount of money available for transportation or for schools. So they claim that they did everybody a favor by getting rid of moratoriums. They actually did you a disservice. With moratoriums, the housing and roads used to be paid for by developers. They would get developer money, things would get built. You had orderly development in the county. The farther you move away from that nexus between developers and paying for infrastructure, the more the cost of that lands on you and not on developers. And because people don't want to raise taxes on you in general, we wind up with nothing. Because if you're waiting for somebody else to pay for it and they don't, and you decided you're not going to raise taxes to pay for it, then you let the growth go on without building the corresponding infrastructure. We've been in this box for a very, very long time. Montgomery County job growth has been mostly flat over a 20-year period, if not longer. We struggle because we don't build infrastructure. And I've got a proposal to change the tax structure in Montgomery County to shift more of the burden onto commercial property and lighten the burden somewhat on residential property, because that's what they did in Virginia in 2012. Virginia was kind of stuck like we were, and they had Tyson's Corner, massive amount of land, but just another shopping center. It's not like it wasn't a very exciting place. Maybe they had bigger stores than we do. They had two shopping centers across from each other. We've never done that, but that's what they had. They passed a series of taxes in Northern Virginia, and the developers ask for the taxes. And they go down to the state legislature with a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, the developers ask them to give the Northern Virginia counties the right to put in a differential tax on commercial property so they could build the infrastructure, which they knew would lead to economic development and bring people and companies back into Fairfax County. And that was backed up by all these studies people were doing that says transportation is the primary inhibitor of economic development. If you can't move people, then people don't want to go there. So Fairfax puts these taxes in place. Fairfax County explodes. Montgomery County refuses to do anything with taxes. And we sit here and we're not able to move the needle. We've got the Red Line, but Red Line's basically designed to ferry people into the District of Columbia. It is not a Montgomery County interconnection. There is no east-west in this line, and there's only one north-south on each side of the county. So we don't have a proper transportation system. So I've been pushing to do that. But my point in all this is that people went on a different path than we did. And we made a mistake staying on the path we're on now. When you think about what Thrive, would do this, but this is what this plan is going to do, you're going to wind up with a greater need for infrastructure with no means to pay for it, unless somebody gets tired of it and says, well, you have to tax residents, and that's not out of the question. I don't know how you rezone the county without consulting the residents. I mean, people buy homes because they like the neighborhood. Everybody I know will tell you how long they looked for a home to be in a place they wanted to live. They like the trees, they like the quiet, they like whatever it is about these neighborhoods. They didn't want to live in an urban area, and they didn't want to live in townhouses. They wanted to live in this environment. And to just say we're going to rezone 80%, is it 80% or 82%? 82% of the single family homes in Montgomery County, we're going to rezone it without consulting with the people who live there, without asking them, how is this going to affect your quality of life? They dismiss, if you talk about quality of life, they just dismiss it. If you talk about traffic, they dismiss it. If you talk about parking, and there are plenty of neighborhoods around here who could not afford to have 3 or 4 houses on a block converted to quads. If they're going to be quads with 4 cars for every quad, you're not going to be able to park in your streets. And it's going to be, and in the view of parking planning, and so far the council, there's no problem with that. You're bad people, and you're privileged, and you live in single family neighborhoods, and you know that's just not the wave of the future. It is, I think, incredibly disrespectful of people who live in communities to say we're going to rezone everything without talking to you about it. The other thing which I just started realizing was they've approved a bunch of housing developments, major developments. They don't require this housing in these places. No. You know what? They don't require this kind of housing in the places they're rezoning because they're empty. And I'm not recommending going into Potomac or Falls Road, but they recommend nothing on Falls Road and Potomac, but they go up to Boyd's and say Boyd's has a train which only runs in the morning into DC and runs in the evening out of DC. There is no back and forth service all day long. And they target Boyd's for this because it's got a train. The Falls Road is, it's a 2-lane road, but if you don't care about infrastructure costs, you can make it a 4-lane road, and we could run bus service over there. I could run bus service into Potomac. The idea, it's no surprise what got left out of their planning. But the scary thing is when they're doing like in Viva White Oak, which is scheduled for thousands of housing units, instead of planning, neighborhoods with quads, triplexes, and duplexes, it's pretty much going to look like a typical Montgomery County development. And I feel that, if you're going to build this housing, you can either go into residential neighborhoods, or you can tell developers who have these master plans that have not been out, that we're going to relook at these master plans because you haven't built them yet, and make changes to make sure we have the housing type that you say everybody needs. And you could require it in these places without displacing anybody because it hasn't been developed yet. These are shopping centers that are eventually going to become these bigger developments. So instead of saying that's where we should put the housing, because this is what people want, they don't do that over there, and they focus on the residential neighborhood. And that's pretty simple. It's because it's easier to do this to you than it is to do to developers, because developers will spend a lot of money on campaigns. I have experience with this. I think between my last two elections, about $20 million was spent to keep me out of office. So I know what money's like, and most of it is from developers. So they don't want to mess with people who are bread and butter for them. They'll mess with you. And it's like just another aspect of how unfair this whole process has been. If they really wanted to do this, they'd relook. Even in Bethesda, instead of going from one end to the other with high rises, they would keep the high rises tented around the metro, and they'd use a proper, what a walk shed is? Walk shed is an expression. It's how far people will walk to either a job or to housing. People will walk a half mile to home, they'll walk a quarter mile to a job, and it is not as the crow flies, it's as you walk. And so you're not flying over all these buildings between you and your destination. You have to make right turns, left turns, you have to wait for traffic lights and all that stuff. Park and planning, unique to anybody in the country that we can find, has decided the walk shed is a mile.
In a straight line.
In a straight line. They know this is not normal practice. I'm not saying anything that everybody doesn't know. Well, MATA will tell you that the walk shed around a metro station is a half mile. Park and planning invents a new number, which justifies them pushing out to a greater extent, and they just say, well, people will do this. I don't know anybody who's walking to a grocery store a mile. I'm sorry, that's not happening. I wouldn't even do that when I was healthy and younger. That was not something I would go out and do. So there's a real inconsistency pretty much in everything that they've put out there. And it's really concerning. This thing needs to be killed. There is no compromise. And they need, if it was me, I would replace the planning board, because I don't need a bunch of ideologues on there who think you're the enemy because you live in a single family home. I need people who will follow planning principles rather than their belief system. I know about ideology. I'm pretty progressive. I know I'm not the left, but I also live in the real world. And you're limited to what you can do by the constraints of the real world. They need to be limited by the constraints of the real world too. They can't use their imaginations and say, this is evil, we're going to get rid of it. And I don't know what they think they're going to get different since the housing is so expensive. They're not going to integrate the neighborhoods. So if race was an issue for them, this doesn't solve that problem. And it doesn't solve the problem of missing middle because it's too high priced for missing middle, and it doesn't address affordable housing. There are a few developers who are deprived in the county because we are running out of greenfields. You're not going to do many multi-acre developments. The project in Viva White Oak is 300 acres, but it's an old sand and gravel pit that's being repurposed. We're doing a 500-acre development up in Armory Grove because there's a lot of county land and some other land up there we can get access to. It's a restoration of an historic Black community that got booted out in urban removal in the 70s, and we're going to go back in working with HOC and others to rebuild the community over there. We have, if Park and Planning backs down and lets Richie Cohen build his project, we'll be doing 1,000 units over there at the back of Pike and Rose. So I'm not against building housing, and I will build as much of it as we can build, but truth is, nobody's gonna build something there's not demand. Parking Plan is, they did a White Flint study. Anybody know they did a White Flint study?
Mm,
They asked the developers, why aren't you building?
Yeah.
Because how many years ago did we rezone White Flint? Right, millions of square feet of development are supposed to get. The developers said, we're not building because there's no market. We can't get rents
Ah,
at the level we want rents. And so they're not building. That's another parking planning problem that goes back to zoning. If I rezone your property for high rise, the value of your property goes up. But it's based on the zone potential build out. So if you got what was used to be the zone C2, where you could have maybe a 2-story building that covered most of the lot, you only have so many square feet. If you can build 20 stories, or in Silver Spring, they planned a 30-story building, you get a lot more density off the same square footage of a lot. That makes that lot a lot more valuable, which drives up the cost. So now you've paid a lot of money for a lot that you can build a high rise on. And then you discover there's no demand for the high rise. If I build what I could sell now, you build a smaller building, it doesn't pencil out as well because you pay too much for the land. So these guys are sitting on this property. White Flint is sitting on thousands of units that could be built tomorrow if parking planning hadn't zoned all this stuff for high rise. It's just, we shoot ourselves in the foot when we do this. The obsession with it as a housing type does not get us the kind of mix of housing that we really need. And it's frustrating for me to deal with them. I offered to meet with the planning board in the summer. They want to meet with me. They have a committee that was looking at, I call it the growth and infrastructure policy, what used to be the adequate public facilities. I said, before you recommend, because what they wound up recommending was further reduction of developer payments for development of Montgomery County and inclusion in the no payment area, another swath of properties in Montgomery County. This is what they sent over to the council. The council will probably decide this next week. I said, can I meet with you? Can I talk about, let's do what they do in Virginia. This is obviously not working. And I was told they didn't want to meet with me. So they didn't meet with me. This is no way to have a planning board. And it's not going to serve us well. And if we have to go through continual fights over this nonsense, it's going to be a problem. If you've got members who feel like, they're really mad at me, they're going to be mad at you. But if you thwart them, they're not going to go away quietly. They will continue to try to come back at this. So anyway, we've done a lot of research on my staff. I've got Debbie's one of my staff members, but Meredith Wellington is on my staff. She used to be on the planning board. Before I had Meredith, I had Pierre. Pierre was the deputy director of the planning board. I have always had planning people on my staff, so I have some vague idea of what I'm doing in an area that I don't start out being familiar with. And so I've had the advantage that no council members had of being able to work closely with people who actually were in planning in Montgomery County. But these are staff people I have, and it makes a difference. And so Claire Isley, who worked for Marilyn Praisner for years and did a lot of the land use and zoning stuff for Marilyn, works for me. I've got Meredith working for me. So I've got people who actually have the skills and knowledge to kind of assess things. None of them are driven by a particular ideological view of housing. I was asked by a Post reporter, am I opposed to quads, triplexes, and duplex? I said, not on principle. But I said, you could go to DC, in Northwest DC, and you'll find, I grew up on Somerset Street. Somerset Street, the house I was in was a duplex. It also has combinations of single family homes on the street. And there are also parts of that area in Northwest DC. This is by Coolidge High School and Tacoma Metro. There are also small apartment buildings, but everything was built as part of a plan. So if you had an apartment building, you weren't trying to shoe it in to a 6,000 square foot lot or a 9,000 square foot lot. You set out your plan and you said, this is where the apartment building is going to be. We want green around the apartment building so it doesn't butt up against everything else. We don't want things running perpendicular to road, overlooking somebody's backyard. All these housing types were accommodated in the zoning. You need parking. There was either parking out back or there was parking in front. All these decisions are made when you do smart planning, which is why if you wanted to do this to every shopping center in Montgomery County, I could care less. As long as it's planned right, so that somebody would actually want to buy the house and live there, and you have the opportunity to deal with the stormwater, the street sizes, make contributions to the schools, all those things, we can manage that. But there's no managing this. There's no ability to raise the money that it's going to take to manage it, and there's no ability to deal with the consequences that are going to come from it. So that's sort of basically how I'm looking at things. And I've been talking to people out in the community. I get a fair bit of flack from it, from the so-called YIMBY crowd. But they never talk about affordable housing. Their idea of this is the other thing about these folks. This is like Koch brothers stuff. Koch brothers' idea is their idea of how to deal with housing in America is go into the urban areas, do exactly what park and planning is doing, to raise the prices of the housing, and you will remove the minority population from those areas. And this is their approach to doing this. I feel like can't believe I'm getting this in Montgomery County, but the primary advisor to park and planning, not park and planning, but Council of Governments, they work with the Mercatus Institute. Mercatus Institute's a Koch-funded foundation. So you're getting stuff that is coming from the ideological right and focused on redoing what's, happened to cities. We're not a city, which is the other thing. We are not a city. We have choices that Minneapolis doesn't have, or that Portland didn't have, and Seattle doesn't have, in that you can still have 90,000 or 100,000 units in your future development plans, which tells you, even though Casey Anderson will say we're all zoned, just massive amounts of land are zoned for single family homes. That's true, but they're not built, and built is different than zoned for. But if you're in Minneapolis, the place is already largely built out. You will be hard put to find anything in Minneapolis bigger than large parking lots. But you're not going to find expanses of land where the developer can imagine, like in East County at Viva White Oak, where he could build 6,000 housing units. Those things are few and far between, but you're not going to find them in Minneapolis. You're not going to find that land vacant in Seattle, because all those places got built out. They are cities that have a history of over 100 years of development, all of which means that they've built everything they can pretty much possibly build. So if I wanted to accommodate more population and more jobs, I probably have to think about it. Montgomery County is not there yet. We have options. And if they're smart about what they do with shopping centers, and I've proposed taking the office parks and which are vacating, and taking the office parks, turning them into townhouse developments where you could get in decent housing, and they're going for very cheap. And I saw something the other day that was like 25 cents on the dollar from the last sale. In fact, I see multiple properties like that. Those are opportunities for the county to do what these guys want to do, which is build communities that fit that footprint. So they should have at it. I will help them do that. But they don't need to go to you to solve this problem. There are other ways. If there is a problem, there are other ways to solve it. But if you look at the housing data, and there's more than 10 of you, I made 10 copies of my summary sheet. But
we'll make copies.
I'll leave you some. The big takeaways, is this the right one? My difference tables. I was looking at Montgomery County versus Frederick, and we're down, the job projections are 49,000 jobs by 2020. They were off 27,000 jobs. They're off by for 2025, 36,000 jobs. They're off by for 2030. This is the difference between the original projections and what they're projecting now. So if I was a planning board member and I saw these projections, which they should have since they go to them, I would have said, well, I guess we don't have this immediate need to build 20,000 or 10,000 more units. I would have said, we don't have, that pressure is not on us. They won't even talk about this. They won't tell you stuff they know. And so, because I'm difficult, I look for things, which is also clear. If somebody want to answer a question, then you should look. That's usually what happens. So is this helpful to you?
Yeah,
guys?
very.
Yes.
One quick question. You mentioned ideology.
Yeah.
as one thing that's driving it. You also alluded to developer pressure, money.
Mhm.
Does that play in this, or are they just sitting on the sidelines waiting for it to happen?
No, they're not. They're contributing to the term limit thing.
Yeah.
It's like $100 and some $1,000 from developers. Because they can't beat me in an election despite spending millions. So if they can keep me from running again, the best way to do that is just take away my ability to.
And the planning committee, did they influence that, or were they doing it all on their own?
No, the planning committee is influenced by that because they feed, there are multiple types of developers. There are single family developers in the county who do infill. They're the ones that do the McMansions, which also became an excuse. If you're gonna have a McMansion, why not build an apartment building? McMansions are not as big as the apartment buildings we're talking about building. But then there are developers that do the high rise. You get Clark Construction. They're not coming into your neighborhood to do high rises. But there are a few major developers who specialize in townhouses. And the big fields that do townhouses are going away. You like I said, you can't build a 500 unit townhouse development in very many places in Montgomery County. You can do smaller lots, you can do infill, but you're not going to do 500. So your neighborhood has become the next greenfield. And so you can treat it as something that should be more densely developed for the good of the county, always the good of the county, not for their personal pockets, of course, but for the good of the county. If they treat your place like a greenfield, and then they can come in and things you got to worry about, probably less so here than other parts of the county, but on George Avenue, where most of the single family housing is actually rental, somebody who gets a green light to build an apartment building, if you assemble it on George Avenue, is going to pay a landlord a lot of money. Right now, they're renting to lower income people. They're getting a rate of return for sure, but somebody's going to dangle millions of dollars in front of them for property. You have a neighborhood in Bethesda on the south side of Bethesda, right above or behind where Silver is.
Yeah.
You know the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay, they were ready to all sell out to a developer. True, they wanted to get rezoned because they were going to sell to a developer who would do massive development. So if you got a developer who's willing to spend that much money, because those were not low income houses, if they're willing to spend that much money to acquire a neighborhood for the density that they would have gotten, imagine what they're going to do in places where the housing is still affordable. They'll spend a lot of money to put property together. And if anybody questions the ability to change the appearance of a Wheaton or an Aspen Hill, just go down into DC. I'd go down 13th Street all the time. That neighborhood, all the way downtown, is completely changed. Totally and completely changed. And it's all outside money coming in, either buying and renting, or it's people coming in and buying houses for themselves and renovating.
Well,
Thank you.
Mr. Elrich, thank you for your remarks. And would you be open to questions from my council colleagues? Yes, Susan?
Yeah.
Oh, well, before I open it up to the resident comments, which, did anyone on the council?
I kind of asked mine, yeah.
Oh, yes, you already went.
So we got ideology and we got development.
Big money.
So yes, Arthur's our Alexander, our at-large member, Jeff Lander, our treasurer, Susan Fatty, who's our secretary. Our vice chair, unfortunately, couldn't be here tonight. He has an ailing family member. He's in Germany, so he's on the next day time. But he sends his thanks for attending tonight. But yeah, if none of you have questions, or would you like to ask something, Susan?
Maybe you've indicated that Animus is just suburban, single family communities at large. Is the planning commission in any way benefiting personally from?
I don't know if they're benefiting, but if they have future political ambitions, they're benefiting.
Yeah, that's what I wondered
Say
if that's
who they
really the.
are, Who is on the planning commission
So
and how did they get there?
there's a guy named, I think it's Barclay, Sean. He's okay. He's a Republican.
I mean, how many people are
So,
there?
so the park and planning, the council appoints them. They have they have terms, so they don't all come up at the same time. If I had known what I knew about the second guy, I would have vetoed him. They would have overridden me. But Hendrickson and what's his name? You know who he is. He's got longish hair and he's younger. That's what I remember. Anyway, him and Hendricks are the real problems. They're both in this belief that we should build housing everywhere.
How many are there altogether?
5. So you start with 2 of them as a deficit. The chair is Artie Harris. He used to work for Bozzuto. And then he worked for Montgomery Housing Partnership. And every time I talk to him, he tells me about the challenges that developers face. And, and that we're being too mean to them. You can see the poverty all of them have experienced. It must be terrible. And then, so you're starting with 3 people who are predisposed on the other side. Mitra used to work in the Parks Department, but she's not differentiating herself on this. There's enormous pressure to conform. I've had planning board members tell me that when they were coming up for reappointment, they were told to shut up and not ask questions. And if they did, they'd recommend to the council not reappoint them.
And the council itself.
Well, you can figure that out.
I think Jeff had a question and then we're gonna open it up to residents if you have time. Yes.
Thanks. And I'll make this brief because I know there's many online in here who'd like to ask questions. But first of all, thank you so much. You probably recognize the voice and face. I've been on some of your listening sessions, and starting off with just, again, thank you so much. And data to me is so important. I mean, here, as you may have heard when you were walking in, I serve as the treasurer, but recognizing the impact this can have on us, on our bottom line, the possibility of what that might mean for tax implications because of what happened, as you know, not long ago, the county council and their look at the impact taxes and how they will gut that or potentially gut that going forward. The other role that I have as a volunteer is I serve as a VP and on the executive board of Silver Creek Medical School. So the idea of, again, where and how, what resources will come for this. But my question is this. So tomorrow, and I share with everyone out there on the call and here, Montgomery County, the council and the planning board. So there's a deadline tomorrow, and if not, it can be shared again. There's a deadline tomorrow to submit feedback through their website. And if your feedback does not go through that official channel, it won't be heard as part of their official report. So one is, no, the deadline is tomorrow at 5 o'clock to submit your feedback. You could be in favor of it. You could, whatever it is. So, but tomorrow is your day. And then as Katie mentioned, we as a council have at the state level are looking to advocate around the all housing types and our authority. And I guess the question might be from the perspective or your perspective, what else? What could we do? Because I think that this is something, there's a lot of questions you pose and show a lot of data. But also, I think there's frustration because they feel that we've seen them present. There are templates they've already created for us that we probably will have to use if their plan goes through. So people have said to you on your online forums, what's the point? So maybe share how and what is the action here other than listening and feeling a little bit out of the loop on what we could do.
So first place, there are a lot of people like you who are angry. You link up. Jenny Sue Dunner, I'm sure you know Jenny Sue. She's part of a larger civic group. There's another civic organization out there. And they're linking up to push back on this. But I'll be blunt, and I may upset some people because it's political, but I used to go to civic, I still do this. I go to civic meetings and people would say to me, why doesn't the council listen to us? When I was on the council. I'd say, well, A, none of you will run for office and challenge them. None of you participate in political campaigns. None of you donate the candidates. So the council's figured out they can do anything they want, and you'll be angry, but you're going to go home quietly, and there are no consequences. You need to have consequences. So when we were dealing with 10 Mile Creek and trying to save that stream, it took a local issue, made it a countywide issue. And then the message that came from whether you were in Clarksburg or down in Silver Spring was vote for the master plan, and you will not get our votes in these communities. And I took a situation, they were trying to put this there without telling me. They had already arranged a vote on something. And somebody accidentally went in my office and asked me what I thought about it. And I said, about what? So we wound up passing protections for 10 Mile Creek on a 9-0 vote, which is a vote I would have lost 8-1 if the community hadn't gotten involved and fought. In Aspen Hill, there was a proposal to rezone the old Geico facility over there for, they were going to put on everybody's favorite thing, Walmart. And I worked with the community group over there. They started a campaign. Next thing you know, signs sprouted up all over the neighborhood, making it very clear, vote for Walmart is a vote you're not going to get from us. And taking that approach, you have to have consequences. If people don't worry about what you're going to do, they can do anything. I mean, it's a hard message to put out there, but you're not going to win everything on reason. And political weight makes a lot of difference. And you ultimately are voters. When they sense that communities are really angry about things, and if communities are savvy enough to say there are going to be consequences for what you vote, we're not going to forget about it. 2 years is within most of our memory abilities. We're going to know who was where on this issue, and we can find other council members who, will support us. That's the most powerful thing you can do to somebody. Absolutely. But a lot of people like to be nice. And, you do have to get a tad confrontational when you're telling somebody you will not be getting votes. But at the same time, if you're not willing to stand up and be a little bit pleasantly aggressive, then you wind up just losing, and you just confirm to them if they don't hear you, don't see you, and don't feel the pressure from you, they just conclude that, well, you're actually not going to do anything. And that's important. I was a community organizer. I organized tenants in Tacoma Park. I organized even when I was a council member and brought tenants to protest against the council, even though I was sitting on the council. But it makes a difference. And that's, I'd encourage you to, figure out how you make your voice clear that this is one of those watershed issues. There is no anything else you can do for me that's going to offset what you're doing to me with this one.
Okay, good.
Do we have
Thank you
any
so much.
questions from the residents? I'm going to do
And there are online too, so just so you know.
Have them come up to this.
Oh, could you come up to the podium if you have a question, Larry? And then I'm going to toggle back and forth between.
Just
Yeah.
our own local Martin's Additions issue on this. WSSC is a constant fight between PG and Montgomery County as to where funds go. And WSSC is a bit of a sorry mess when it comes to providing infrastructure. Do you see any, so here would be a situation where we would have more housing suddenly coming into rather than PG County would. PG County's complaint is that all the funds, or most of the funds that go into WSSC get spent in Montgomery County. So how would we exactly overcome that type of thing? Is there any?
I don't think most of the funds get spent in Montgomery County.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but that's,
But what does happen, that because for years they didn't charge fees properly.
Right.
They're at a point now where much of the system over there is going to fail. And we're dealing with that.
You're taking over part of it.
We do have part of it.
Yeah.
Tacoma Park took it over flat out. So we weren't under their fee system. But the challenge you face is that they really don't have enough money to replace the infrastructure. And which is one of because the flooding problem is a real one. We've hired a hydrologist, a team to work on Montgomery County because we realized we can't fix the flooding problems on each individual street without understanding how the water got there and where it's coming from. They're going to issue a report that's going to depress a lot of people because people are going to discover they're in a floodplain and they didn't know they were in a floodplain. We've got an obligation to do this report, and WSSC does not have the wherewithal. They've asked for a 12.5% increase this year. They're not going to get it. I have problems with what they're asking for. If they were telling me they were going to put this money all into people who are going to be on the ground working in the community and getting work done, I feel different about it. I don't see that. I would not fund their automated, expensive collection of data because it was more expensive than having people collecting the data, which is a problem because this is supposed to be software you got read by cars driving down the street rather than meter readers going to each house. So I'm trying to focus them on things that actually make a difference with the dollars they have. I don't think they charge enough on commercial property. So I think we wind up eating some of the cost of building that infrastructure here. But I would not try to strangle them on the money. I mean, we're not going to give them everything they want, but they're going to need more money and the county's going to need more money. We're just,
Well, if they can't solve our infrastructure problems, what would happen? Is the county going to have to step in and provide that expansion?
we're already preparing for that.
Well, you're doing storm drain stuff.
Yeah.
What about sewage and water?
We've got capacity in sewage and water. We're looking at a possibly the quarry up in off of where Shady Grove Road ends, or Travilla Road ends, Travilla Quarry. We need a second water supply. Everybody's kind of concluded if we hit drought conditions, you take water from this dam in West Virginia, and it takes days for the water to actually get down here. And we can't afford to be days without water, so we're trying to look at Travilla to be a backup quarry, or to be a backup water source for the region, so we can fill it up and keep the pipes full. Right now, the way we do it is we take water from, what is it, Great Seneca Creek, or the lake up there. And it's the worst waste of water, but it's the only thing we have. We put so much water into the Potomac River so that the level of the river rises above the intake pipes. Because the reason you get the water supply drops is the intake pipes wind up above the water level, and water doesn't go into them. If this were a proper system, instead of flooding the river with water that will never get used, you would pipe directly from the lake into supply lines that go to the treatment place. And that's a lot of money to build the supply lines to go to the treatment place. That's one of the things we're looking to deal with. And I expect that to come on the horizon in the not too distant future.
Well, we may have enough water supply here for what we've got, but
Well,
frankly, they haven't done anything on our fire hydrants in 40 years. They claimed this year they were going to inspect them, flush them, clean them. It said, we had a house burned down here because the fire hydrants failed. And they literally they give us this gassy answers that it's in the budget and they're going to do it. I go around and I check all the fire hydrants and the paint is not broken off where you unscrew the caps. They haven't touched it.
you make a note about that you can ask about the testing the fire hydrants up here
Flushing and
because
testing.
of the failures.
So I'm gonna jump to someone on Zoom who's been waiting, and then I'm gonna jump to you, Lori, and toggle back and forth. Holly Worthington, I see your hands up.
Yes.
Can you come
yes.
off mute? Okay. Hi, Holly.
Hi, how are you all? I just wanted to say that everything you're saying is right. And I've in real estate in Montgomery County for over 40 years, and I know what you're talking about, and what you're saying is exactly right. And I'm saying that so other people who haven't been in real estate around here for so long can know that I absolutely agree with everything you've said about jobs, where people want to live, where the vacant land is. And I don't know how we can overturn what may end up being a legislative proposal and stop it. They managed to do that in Arlington, where they were pushing for the same sort of thing, not exactly the same. You probably know more about that than I do, but I just thank you for your help and your leadership. So thank you.
So if the worst thing happens,
Thank you, Ellen.
flat out, you organize for the next election and you just work with the community groups around the county and get rid of every council member who votes for it. Period. But the-
Lori?
Okay.
This is Lori Mitchell. You can come up to the podium.
Okay.
Okay, this is Lori Mitchell.
Hi, I'm Lori Mitchell, nice to meet you. Thank you for coming tonight. I think my comments are gonna align with yours, but I also think they expand on yours, and so I hope it'll be helpful to you. I also hope they fall within your definition of pleasantly aggressive. These are the comments I am planning to submit tonight through the portal when I go home. My husband and I are really concerned about the attainable housing proposal and the overall process that's been followed. I've actually participated in one listening session and I've closely followed several others. Actually, I think I've gone to all of them online and I've listened to many of the online local municipality listening sessions. From what I've gathered, it seems the Planning Commission was tasked by the County Council to address the missing middle housing shortage, but was not given the prerequisites to consider environmental impact, parking, education constraints, infrastructure limitations, and quality of life. As a result, the Planning Board has put forth a plan at tremendous tax dollars to all of us that fails to address even the most basic issues and has unnecessarily caused all this division within our community. I take my puppy to the dog park every morning, and instead of talking about the things we would normally talk about, this is all we talk about at the dog park. What's even more disheartening is that despite numerous resident concerns voiced during the listening sessions, the Planning Board staff repeatedly emphasized that their unanimous vote was final. So, they didn't really care what we had to say. Seems like they put the cart before the horse, that why are they having listening sessions if their vote's already final? It was also concerning to witness the apparent presence of several residents who supposedly supported the plan, who appeared repeatedly at different listening sessions throughout the county. It was the same person handing the mic. So I'm pretty sure she recognized that it was the same person. But, and then at one session, a resident requested that everyone who worked for the county stand up, and half the people in the room rose. To me, that's just some kind of political theater of the worst kind. It's essential our voices are heard and that the planning process takes into account the genuine concerns of the community. And I hope that moving forward, there'll be a lot more transparency and opportunities for meaningful community input and the decision-making process. And thank you for everything you said tonight.
Thank you. It is discouraging that, the listening sessions gave people 2 minutes. What? the hell?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, really?
2 minutes would have been
But apparently they-
an innovation.
Oh,
But,
Uh,
yeah.
But the idea that you could make a meaningful comment in 30 seconds about anything that's important is a joke, which tells you they actually had no intention of listening to you. And when the planning board was doing their Thrive hearings, in collusion with the council member, one of my least favorite former council members, they alerted the people who they knew would support them to call in and get slots before anybody else can get slots. And then they filled up the slots, and then they wouldn't expand the time for comment. Because, we only have, what did they spend on these listening sessions? About an hour? Yeah. I spend more time, I'm doing 11 budget sessions around the county. I spend more than an hour doing a budget session. And I extend my time if people are waiting there with questions. It's just like, I don't want to hear you, but I'm going to pretend like I'm hearing you and giving you a chance to be heard, but it's meaningless.
We have a hand on up at home. Elizabeth Goldberg, would you like to ask a question or comment?
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Goldberg. 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I played soccer all my life till 50. And I want Governor Hogan and Jamie Raskin or Jaime to understand that there are 2 football fields here that attract players. And I coach a team called Los Prostaticos, or the old people. And we have players from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Brazil, Salvador, even Hawaii, Chile, and southern cone of South America, including Montevideo, Uruguay. So I ask you people to get together and each take a field and build a fence. I don't mean a fence that is extravagant, just so the kids who play don't go rolling off into the street and get killed. We've had a number of accidents. In fact, one day, a Hare Krishna guy showed up, and I thought he was the arbitrator. So that tells you how what shape I'm in. And all I want to do is listen to the birds, read my books, do Tai Chi, and think about what it is to hold my grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goldberg,
Can
for
I do
your
a quick
comment.
commercial?
Yes, yes,
There is
please.
a referendum issue. Does you know about the ballot question? You guys know about the ballot question?
On the election.
Yeah, would limit me to 2 terms.
Yeah.
And it's a Republican developer finance thing. You know, if you want to help, we need people to help us get the word out. And to vote no on that, because I don't know what happens, where this would go if I were on the council. There's not another council member who does this kind of work in the community. You won't find it. So I hope you guys can help out on that.
Any other comments in the room? Any questions, comments from residents? Oh, yes,
Sorry.
please. Yeah, please. Yeah.
I'm Ed Novak. So I'm a little confused by trying to put together some of the things you said. I just, want to understand. I think what I heard you say is that the projection of the demand for housing is overstated because Montgomery County is losing jobs.
That's the reason, but projections are parking planning's actual projections,
Okay.
not mine.
And the county's losing jobs, which is not a good thing. But then you also said that, part of the reason that they're losing jobs is the cost of infrastructure is not supporting commercial development. And for my business, and I'm in venture capital and other things, I mean, I'm a very happy resident of Martin's Additions. Love my neighbors, love my community, don't get me wrong.
I like venture capitalists.
But when I look at what Northern Virginia is doing, and I do, and see from every, including friends that are at the director level at the Center for Innovative Technology and you name it, Northern Virginia, I can assure you that commercial property taxes and commercial taxes and fees in general in Northern Virginia are substantially less than they are in Maryland, except for life sciences,
The numbers we have, comes out of a study by DC, but does a comparative study every 2 years. Montgomery County is the cheapest place to develop in the region. Our base tax is $1.04, and add 11 cents to that for the state, so we wind up at $1.15. In Fairfax County, base tax, I think, is $1.12. Every square inch of commercial property pays 12.5 cents on their property tax. So now their base tax for commercial property is $1.25. If you are developing in Tyson's Corner, you add almost 30 cents to that total, so you're at about $1.54. Montgomery County still at $1.04. If you're in the 29 corridor, some of the other places they have special taxing districts, you're paying around $1.40. So Fairfax is
Yeah.
way higher than this. And Fairfax has a BPOL tax, which is business license tax. Montgomery does not have any tax on businesses, no taxes.
Mhm.
And we do not get a piggyback tax on businesses the way we do on residents. The BPOL tax in Fairfax County brings them $200 million a year, only from businesses. Every business, from the guy in his basement doing accounting for somebody to the largest companies in the area. So we're actually the lowest tax. The only place Maryland is higher is the income tax. But when developers are doing property, they're worried about what are the taxes on their property. So if you're paying $1.54 in Tyson's on your shopping center or on your office building, and you're paying $1.04 in Montgomery County, you should be here. The reason they're not here is Virginia took that money and put these taxes in place deliberately. And developers asked for it because they knew they would get the transportation that would drive development. We get killed because they can move people and we can't. And I'm happy to share with you the data we've got because, again, not my data, but data from Fairfax County and data from Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
So, and the governor's now going to propose a reduction in the corporate income tax in the state of Maryland, which he hopes, well, it'll be low enough that it'll be competitive, which would put Montgomery County in a really good position. Also, Fairfax County, because they are so dependent on commercial real estate, they're looking at further raising taxes, and there's a discussion now about having income taxes in Fairfax, which they don't have now. They got a car tax, they have a food tax, they got a bunch of taxes we don't have, but they don't have an income tax. They're even looking at considering that. So I promise you, we are not more expensive than to develop in
Well,
Fairfax.
on the commercial side, we're also taking into account, utility taxes and, as you know, data centers, can't work in Montgomery County because the excessive utility taxes and things like that. So, there's different things here, but even on the residential side, income taxes are lower in Northern Virginia, than Montgomery County and the state, certainly.
See, but if you combine all the taxes, that's why you can't use income taxes as the only surrogate. You got to look at all the taxes.
No, I
you pay
understand.
here and there.
But what I'm saying is that, in general, I mean, I think maybe you need to do a better PR job.
Yes, we do.
Because I would tell you that, within the business community, it's generally accepted that Northern Virginia is less expensive to do business, both for residential development as well as commercial development. Now, some of that may be, different than the B-poll taxes and the commercial property taxes, but the general consensus is. And so my concern is, why are we losing employment?
Because you don't have transportation. Virginia put in place not only the Silver Line, but every county in Virginia has bus rapid transit planned and getting built. In Arlington County, where they did the metro station there, the county of Arlington put out a bond for $240 million for that station. The bond is underwritten by impact, not the impact tax, by development district taxes, as well as some money from Arlington, but by development district taxes in Arlington. My total bonding capacity in Montgomery County is $280 million. My budget is $7 billion. Arlington's budget is $800 million. They can do that because the developers are paying to build, but the developers don't care because the infrastructure brings them access to jobs and high quality transportation, which is what Montgomery County has not been able to deliver.
But as you know, impact fees are not legal. And
I would get rid of impact fees here, as it replace them with the taxing districts, because the taxing districts work better. It gives, with an impact fee, if everybody in this room were a property owner, I only get an impact fee when you build a building. So you're not all going to build a building at the same time. With the development district, everybody's paying some tax, but you only pay a tax when we float a bond. We can only float bonds for transportation, so nobody has to worry about spending money on schools or healthcare or any of the other nice things. It has to be used for transportation. That's Virginia's rules. We would replicate that. And so we would get a steady stream of money, but I can float a bond against. That's what Arlington could do. Despite having a small county government, they were able to float an enormous bond based on the revenue stream. I can't do that. I can't even fund my schools. In fact, we've kept our bond level for 7 years. So if you're at $280 million 7 years ago, you're not buying the same stuff today that you bought 7 years ago.
Mhm.
So then because they do these district taxes, any project that you build winds up, transportation project winds up in the district taxes. It stays off the general fund taxes. Residents are protected. They made conscious decision over there not to impose these taxes on residents. But the developers were the advocates for it. And the Republican governor, after they passed the tax bill, wrote an editorial in the Post about how this was going to lead to Northern Virginia's resurgence and massive development in Northern Virginia. He was dead right.
Mhm.
If you leave me your email, I will send you some.
I've seen it, and I think part of it too, and that's with this, is that the businesses and the corporations that have asked for those taxes, it doesn't come without the understanding of exactly how those monies are to be spent.
Yep.
1 minute,
for
okay?
those projects,
And ours would be
Where-
exactly like that. It's only done.
Which
for
is
a
not the
project.
case with the current impact.
Yes, in fact,
I think you would agree.
impact taxes are terrible because not only do you pay them, but there's no guarantee that the money I collect will go to a project
Exactly.
or the buildings.
Okay.
I will fix that.
All right, thank you. We have a resident who's been waiting very patiently at home. I believe you know her. Everyone in Montgomery County seems to know her. Her name is Jean Sperling, and she has a question or a comment. Oh, Jean, is Jean on mute? Oh, you're on mute, Jean. There you go.
Well, it's so nice to see you again. We go back, and I appreciate everything you've said tonight. I'm going to give you. Can they hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I have a really anyway. Let me start by saying thank you. You are just awesome. What you said tonight was absolutely fantastic. I could not know where to start, but I'm going to start with one question, beginning and ending. Sir, what do you think we can do? I've followed all the other things that the municipalities around us have done, the calls for making comments, they're due by the deadlines tomorrow, blah, blah. But I worry about, are we all just saying the same damn thing, one after the other? What can we really do to make a difference in what's being said? What can we say? And who should we say it to?
You should say it to the council members.
Okay,
Flat out.
thank you. This is the most important. Tell
You
me,
should like- you
who do
should
we
like-
turn? Who do we turn to, and what do we say?
So I could put you in touch with people in my office who could help you, figure out what argument you want to use and how you want to go at it. But at the bigger picture, I would blanket Wisconsin Avenue and Connecticut Avenue with signs. I'd make sure that every house you can get puts up a sign, because certain council members who represent this area, including at-large members, would have to contemplate that. It worked in Aspen Hill when they were doing Walmart. The stuff we did with 10 Mile Creek worked. I've seen this work. It is the only strategy that works, because it's the best way to send a message that you're not going back if you do this. And people are angry everywhere. You're not. I can go to Wheaton, I can go to Albany, the East County. They got an earful in the East County. So
Except, you know what? I'm not angry. I know that everybody's being told they need to respond by the end of this week. What I want to know is, what is it that we should say?
stop this.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to, because that was my reaction. I thought, well, should I talk to them about all the brilliant things I know about and my basic reaction was, I want to just tell them, would you stop this? And I want to ask you, is that good advice?
Yeah, Saints, look, stop it is good advice. I mean, just,
Okay, thanks.
If-
But when are
Stop.
they don't,
Right.
because they claim they don't have a bill in front of them yet.
Okay, so it's not like we have to do something by December.
But if we say we won't vote for you, if you,
You start that campaign, you get enough people, you will change votes. They're already worried.
Do you, what?
There are people, you know, who think this is too hot to touch.
So, you've been here tonight, and you know that old saying, behind every man is this woman. So it's so true to
Thank you, Jean. And so can we have one more question in the room, all the way in the back? I'm sorry. Come on up.
Quick question, does the Arlington overruling with the missing middle bill have any influence in Montgomery County? Or are the council members waiting to see that shake out before?
So it would depend how they structure their own bill.
Oh my God.
So I don't know what they would do. I'm sure they'll go to a lawyer and have the lawyer say, so this is what the judges overturned this.
It
You know,
was mostly procedural, right?
yeah, so you look for, but you know, the lack of notice here is certainly procedure.
Right.
You're rezoning the entire county, and you think a few meetings where you give somebody, you know, 30 seconds, whatever it is, to have input, no judge is going to take that as input. And I would just challenge it. But look carefully at what the suit is. I know it's what other procedural violations they went through, but they certainly did everything they could do to keep you out of this process for as long as they could keep you out of the process.
Yeah, I think sewage and infrastructure was another point that the judge considered in his ruling.
Yep. I mean, you could look at the original, the adequate public facilities ordinance and say you haven't addressed any of this. And that you can only address it with a comprehensive plan. You can't address it if you're going to allow house by house decisions for what you built.
Thank you.
And again, you can contact our office, you know, Evie's there. We can leave you with contact information. And like I said, I've got 2 people who are really skilled in planning and working in my office. And nobody else can say that.
Well, if there are no,
Katie, I have a question. This is Marty. I can't raise my hand, but
oh,
could I
okay,
ask a
Marty.
question?
If there's no other questions in the room, I was gonna go over to Zoom. This is resident Marty Langland with a question. Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Go ahead, Marty.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Mark, for your outstanding integrity on this issue. I am going to ask you 2 strategic questions. One is, do you think it's possible for residents to get the county council to kick this over into the master plan process rather than handling it as a ZTA? It's totally inappropriate to do something this large as a ZTA. If we got into the master plan process, that would, of course, delay it. You wouldn't stop it, but it would delay it. Is that a strategy that we should pursue?
From my perspective, no. I would say kill it. You don't want to
Okay.
come back. Because think about this, it's going to be the same planning board that would do the master plan. And then when projects came in, that would review the projects. We don't need to be doing this. If there was a need that anybody could demonstrate, then you'd say, okay, what do we do? What do we need to do this? But there are so many other solutions. If you're looking for places to build housing that go far beyond what we've zoned today, that you ought to focus on that. And like I said, focus on the places that are zoned but not built out, and go. If this is the housing people need, correct your mistakes in your other master plans and fix it there. You'll get the units you want. And like I said, I will not be an obstacle. It's not a bad idea if you plan it right. I see cities where it works, but trying to shoehorn this stuff in to already built neighborhoods is a really difficult challenge.
You're exactly right. Let me ask you a second strategic
Also,
question.
your analysis was right. I happen to have
Oh,
your paper.
he has your paper in the room, Marty. Your
Oh, well,
paper.
I'm honored, Mark, that it was helpful to you. Being an economist is occasionally useful. But my second question is, does it make sense to, I take your point about signs, and I'm willing to chip in and put signs everywhere we can. Does it make sense to specifically have the villages, the towns, all the places that the community groups are writing letters, and the village of Chevy Chase apparently wrote a letter to the county council saying, hey, stop it. Would it be helpful in your view politically if a whole bunch of the villages wrote a similar letter to the one the village of Chevy Chase just sent today?
You should all do that. We should get you in touch with Jenny Sue or who's running that side of the group. I'll find out who's running this, because Jenny Sue is running or putting together this large coalition. There used to be a citizen coalition in Montgomery County, so all these different associations called SITPAC. And they used to endorse, they were very active in elections. People are realizing they need to get active again. But you start with getting all of your municipalities to issue a joint statement on this, and then see who else is willing to jump in. And
Thank you.
We could connect you to people in the East County. I mean, the broader the community the letter comes from, the more effective it is. We can add Alney into this. I mean, we can make it very clear that you got a countywide problem here.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Marty.
what about places like Chevy Chase at home or Bethesda at home? Those type of citizens groups.
Yeah.
Does that help if they send in a comment?
Anybody who sends in a comment, they got to count.
Okay,
And if they represent organizations, they got to figure out, okay, what's the size of this organization?
okay, well, great.
Well, if there are no other questions, Mr. County Executive, thank you again for your time. Just some parting things on your desk. That's a Takes a Village mug for you from the Village of Martin's Editions. We also have our most recent newsletter and a map of our village. We're more than 320 homes. And we have stormwater issues. We have a stormwater task force that we just created last year. So you're music to our ears. You said that word.
And thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.